actually huge news. New York Times headline, of course, talking about how the president's allowing airstrikes against Iraq rebels. This is a force that continues to grow and threatens instability, obviously, not just in Iraq, but across the Middle East. So American planes are back over Iraq with some packed food and water, others armed with weapons of war. It's a first in a new U.S. mission to provide to refugees help and also to strike terrorist targets should American lives come under threat. President Obama authorized the operation following new advances by the Islamic militants. They're poised to attack one of the biggest cities in the north, home to an American consulate and hundreds of U.S. citizens and military advisors. The potential airstrikes coincide with a humanitarian push to help thousands of Iraqi citizens that are hiding on a mountaintop from the Sunni gunmen below. They fled the approaching fighters who executed the men, forced women into marriage, and left children dying of thirst in the desert heat. President Obama says it's genocide waiting to happen.
I've therefore authorized targeted airstrikes, if necessary, to help forces in Iraq as they fight to break the siege of Mount Sinjar and protect the civilians trapped there. Already, American aircraft have begun conducting humanitarian airdrops of food and water to help these desperate men, women, and children survive. Earlier this week, one Iraqi in the area cried to the world, "There is no one coming to help."
David Ignatius, New York Times, Peter Baker, a great analysis right off the top, says in sending warplanes back to the skies over Iraq, President Obama on Thursday night found himself exactly where he didn't want to be, hoping to end the war in Iraq. Mr. Obama becomes the fourth president in a row to order military action in that graveyard of American ambition. And so it goes, and so it goes. But I don't know, with ISIS, he had any choice.
I think that's exactly right, Joe. This is a day that President Obama must have hoped would never come on his watch. He spent so much in the extraction of the United States from Iraq and from the wars overseas. He talked repeatedly about turning a page in American history, and now that page flips back again. He spoke emotionally about the potential danger of genocide, strong language for a president, emotionally about people stranded on that mountaintop, who were waiting for someone to come and help them. I think in military terms, what happened over the last few days is that the Kurdish Peshmerga militia, which the U.S. has been counting on to do the fighting along its long 600-mile border with the Islamic State, essentially was forced into retreat. They just were outgunned by these ISIS militants. And that has forced the U.S. to take action, both humanitarian airdrops and preparing for airstrikes on the Kurdish center of Erbil, where U.S. forces are based.
And this is an extraordinary fluid terrorist operation that the Wall Street Journal said this morning. They call it the Islamic State is a dynamic, messianic, outward-moving force. Let's bring in right now from Beirut, BBC correspondent Kim Gtas. Kim, one of the reasons the president can't sit back is because these terrorists, as we certainly would call them here in the United States, are ruthlessly efficient. They are just moving and swallowing up everything in front of them, and doesn't appear to be any end in sight unless America gets involved. Just how much of a threat, a growing threat, is this operation?
Well, there's been a real sigh of relief in the region, I can tell you, particularly in Lebanon, where we've seen a few very bloody incursions by ISIS over the last 10 days. The Lebanese army fought back. It has sustained heavy losses, but it does appear to have pushed them out of Lebanon for now. But there has been a real sigh of relief in the region, in Lebanon, in Syria, no doubt in Iraq, and in other places as well, to see that finally somebody is doing something about the advance of these bloodthirsty, rather savage militants. And it has been quite perplexing, I have to say, Joe, to watch the lack of action and apathy over the last few weeks and months since ISIS first went on a rampage and took Mosul. So there will be a sigh of relief, but as David pointed out, as the New York Times wrote, this is a very reluctant move by President Obama, and to some extent, it is also a half measure. This campaign, whether it's airstrikes or humanitarian drops, is not going to solve the problem. The problem is much more complex than that, which is also probably why it took a while for President Obama to take the decision.
Yeah, and also there's so much going on across the world. We have planes being blown out of the sky over the Ukraine. Of course, the Middle East, all eyes were fixed on what was happening in Gaza. All the while, you talk to foreign policy leaders who would say these are all tragedies, but the real danger is what's going on in Iraq right now with ISIS. This is a dangerous force. The one other thing the Wall Street Journal says this morning, perhaps history will mark this as the week that President Obama recognized that evil unimpeded will devour everything before it. Gideon?
Well, the thing that I am trying to understand is how come the U.S. didn't see the collapse of the Peshmerga coming. In other words, for a long time, the Kurds were saying, we can hold off ISIS. And now it's turned out that they're outgunned. Why was this not predicted? Because now ISIS is threatening basically the only remaining stable piece of that part of the Middle East, which is Iraqi Kurdistan, and it's also the most pro-Western, secular, one of the what could be a bulwark and a U.S. ally.
How did the world not see any of this coming? I mean, they moved with such speed out of Syria. It is extraordinary, and you're right. There was this false hope over the past several weeks that somehow the Kurds were going to be able to hold them off, but they're tearing through.
Right, and so I think that the action the U.S. is taking now is a no-brainer. Throw in some airstrikes and try to support the Kurds, but it's about the only no-brainer that there is.
Yeah.
After this, how do you keep ISIS from extending its reach further? How do you reconstruct the Iraqi government or try and create a countervailing force? And of course, the influence of Iran in all of these areas that we're talking about is going to be a spoiler.
Yeah, and while we talk about Israel,